Och vi ska gå vidare här i energifrågan och välkomna upp vår nästa talare som är Julia Vainio. Julia Vainio hon är energisäkerhetsexpert på NATOs Energy Security Center of Excellence i Vilnius i Litauen. Och hon representerar Finland på det här centret och har en bakgrund som forskare inom universitetsvärlden. Och hon ska prata på temat, och det här blir på engelska då, Energy Security Challenges in the Baltic States, Electricity Synchronization Project. Så välkommen upp, welcome Julia, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Can you hear me all right? Yes. God dag alla. My name is Julia Vainio, and as mentioned, I'm here representing NATO Energy Security Center of Excellence, which is located in Vilnius, Lithuania. I'm very happy to be at PaxBaltica and very happy to represent the Center of Excellence here. And for today's agenda, I would like to take you a bit away from the usual Nordic states, Baltic Sea region perspective and talk about very current issues on the other side of the Baltic Sea, so in the Baltic states. I'm afraid my Swedish, even though I've learned it in school, is a bit rusty, so we will go with English. And I would like to start, let me see if this works, on, and here we go. I'd like to start with my agenda for today. So I assume that a lot of you don't know what NATO Energy Security Center of Excellence is, and I find it very important to give you the context of where I'm coming from with this presentation. We also have to talk about a bit of energy security, because it is not a scientifically defined state for any countries or regions, but it is very fluctuating and changes. So I will show you a few examples so you'll get a better understanding of what I mean when I talk about energy security. Then we get to the actual theme of this presentation, which is electricity network synchronization. It's a lot of difficult words, and I'm afraid it's a bit technical, but I will try to keep it as simple as I can without losing the essence of this. So this is an ongoing case study, ongoing process in the Baltic states, and it's very important also from our perspective as Nordic countries to understand what's going on. And then the future challenges of this synchronization project. So this picture here shows all the different centers of excellence that NATO has accredited across NATO nations. I have circled the Lithuanian one, which focuses on energy security. So we have around 25, give or take, different centers of excellence. There's one focusing on military engineering, another one on countering terrorism, one on strategic analysis in communications. So a lot of the things that NATO nations and partner nations, such as Finland and Sweden, find interesting and worthwhile to put their resources in. The one that I represent here is the energy security one. Lithuania is the host nation for this center. And for example, the one located in Estonia focuses on countering cyber threats. So I'm coming from an organization that collects both NATO nations and partner nations interested in energy security and who want to contribute to that. And that is the work we do at the COE. Our mission consists of 3 different things. I am here in the position of raising awareness of energy developments with security implications. So what my job today is to raise awareness on this matter that is very current in the region. We also develop NATO's competence in supporting critical energy infrastructure. So you know that critical energy infrastructure is a national issue. If you have a nuclear power plant in Sweden, it is Sweden's job to protect that. NATO does not come to your doorstep, or nor does it go to France and tell them that we will support, or we will protect your power plants. That is not NATO's job, but it is to help in providing critical energy infrastructure protection and resiliency building. We also improve energy efficiency of military forces, and that is a very interesting and important job because, as you know, military, especially the Air Force, uses a lot of energy. If we can somehow reduce that amount of electricity or energy or fuel used, we can see those possibilities, that money saved, that fuel saved, go to the actual mission of those armed forces. So this is how the center operates. Just to show you, give you a quick idea, our member states are up in there. I am presenting the strategic analysis division. We also do research and lessons learned. We educate a lot, both military and civilian organizations. And we also participate in the doctrine, more of a, don't tell my colleagues, but on the more bureaucratic and boring part of NATO. We have a program of work, and we do not interfere with the politics of countries. So we don't have a say in Italy, and we can't say that you're doing something wrong or you're doing something right, or you should do this or you should do that. We can raise awareness and give recommendations, but it is not our job to dictate the policy of any country. Here are some of our partners. We are quite a small organization, so we rely a lot on our partners. As you can tell, we also have Swedish partners such as FOI, and we're very happy about these sorts of cooperations. They also increase our expertise, and we can kind of tap into the expertise of these different organizations. So, energy security, what are we talking about? First of all, I'd like to say that energy security is not a static thing. It's not something that I can say that this country or the Baltic Sea region is now energy secure. And now that it is energy secure, it will remain like that forever. We already heard from Anna in her introductory notes that the end of history was supposed to happen 30 years ago and nothing new would happen. What we see in reality is that things constantly change. They develop. We get new technologies. We lose some resources. We get new ones. We form different alliances, which will change the security agenda. Same thing happens with energy security. Something that was deemed dangerous 30 years ago might be very safe today, and vice versa. So we need to be constantly monitoring the developments of any region or any topic to see where we are at in a sort of a lineage of energy security, if you will. A few different definitions. Our NATO NSEC COE's working definition is that energy security refers to the uninterrupted availability and resiliency, so how you can bounce back from an impact of energy sources to support alliance security interests. Whereas International Energy Agency, one of the biggest energy-related organizations, they have a very straightforward, uninterrupted availability of energy sources at a reasonable price. So there's a clear difference. Ours is much more security concerned, whereas International Energy Agency, much more commercial. They're more about the trade than our definition. We also have the G7 plus the European Union 2014 conclusions, where they talk about how to improve energy security. Now, these are very practical measures, and I will show you in a bit how these have been actually applied in our case study as well. But the main bits are flexibility, diversified energy markets, diversified means of getting that energy from different sources, different transportation routes, different ways to store and use energy, enhancing energy efficiency, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and policies regarding trade, regarding competition, regarding the openness of markets. So these are very pragmatic, very political approaches to energy security. Now, the electricity network synchronization. So I know that a lot of the times when we talk about energy security, we talk about gas. We talk about how important it is to not rely on one single supplier. We talk about how important it is to get cheap gas, to reduce the amount of gas we use. Electricity-wise, I think it's, in a lot of sense, much more, it's in a different way more important, in a sense that electricity is something you can't just snap in and out of. You can have a gas disruption, which might have an effect in 2 days or in 3 weeks, depending on how much storage you have, for example. If you have electricity disruption, you either have to have the network in milliseconds balance itself out, or you will face a series of blackouts. You might face a domino effect cascading through the network. So you have to have a very resilient network. You have to have constant balance of supply and demand, and you have to have the technical aspects harmonized. So it's something that is very technical and something that needs constant evaluation. And I think this is one of the reasons we need to pay very close focus on what's going on in the Baltic Sea region. So, like I said, a lot of the things that the G7 plus European Union suggested back in 2014 have already taken place in the Baltic states within the last few decades. So energy security improvements that we've seen in these 3 countries have included, among others, supranational alliances, so alliances with the European Union and NATO, regulatory improvements. They have improved the rules on how to operate, what you can do, how you can build, what sort of things you need to take into consideration. Commercial liberalization has been a key proponent. So that means that instead of having that one market operator who controls, say, the entire gas market or the entire electricity market, they've had to take the vertically integrated companies and divide them into pieces, open the markets for more competition. So instead of having that one Russian supplier, you now need to have other suppliers as well. You can't have a monopoly. There's improved and new infrastructure, which we will see in a bit, both in the gas area and electricity. Regional market involvement. We have Swedish cooperation nowadays, market transactions. We have Finnish ones, we will have Polish ones, and it's a lot more involvement in the region. We also have successful securitization of energy, and this usually raises a few eyebrows when I say this. What I mean by successful securitization is that energy is usually thought of as a commodity. It's something that you trade, something that you buy, and something that you exchange. When you take that commodity and you apply it in a context where you constantly talk about the security effects of it, you will change also the idea of how people think of that energy or think of that thing. So I think in the Baltic states it's been very successful. We've taken an issue that wasn't considered as a security threat before, and now we have applied it in the security sense when we talk about energy security. And this has really helped these countries in developing, sort of through that securitization, also the improvement of the situation. Increased transparency is another thing. You also need to have regulations and open markets, but you need to have transparent activities. So these are some of the means that I think have been vital in the so-called westernization of the energy sector in the Baltic states. And the electricity synchronization will be one of the final stages in that synchronization. In that westernization. So this is also, like I said, supranational alliances. The EU has been a key, vital part of this. We've all incorporated our shared funding to improve the resiliency and the infrastructure in the region. For example, the Juncker's Commission has been very interested in this and has been part of the negotiation with Russia and Belarus and the Baltic states in the synchronization process. Right now, the deadline is 2025 when the actual synchronization will take part. And I know I've talked a lot about the synchronization, and you might wonder what on earth that means. Here is a picture I like to use to elaborate on the situation where we are right now. So, the network that the Baltic states are currently in is called, in abbreviation, BRELL. That stands for Belarus, Russia, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. It means that it's part of a larger Russian electricity network. It's a technical network where you have the same system reserve frequency, for example, where you, in layman's terms, where you operate the system that it functions well together. So you can see that the area that I've highlighted, that is the BRELL network as it is right now. Finland is part of the BRELL network, is not part of the BRELL network. It has commercial interconnections to both Estonia and Russia northwest, so around the St. Petersburg area and all around the border. Part of that network is also Russia, Kaliningrad, which has interconnections to Lithuania. And Belarus is commercially, Belarus is sort of in the same technical system as Russia Center and Ukraine. But these, Russia Northwest and these countries have been divided as a one technical operation. What we want to do, in the 2000s, the Baltic states have remained as the last EU countries that have been synchronized with Russia. So previously, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania have all been part of this big network. Historical reasons have dictated that. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a lot of these countries synchronized themselves to the Central European network, the same network that the Baltic states now want to be part of. When I read a PhD study actually recently about this time when those countries synchronized to the Western network, it didn't mention security concerns, not even once in that study, in that PhD. It talked about monetary issues, it talked about how much more expensive it was to be part of the Russian network because of currency fluctuations. Ruble was not in a very favorable position, so they wanted to change to the European network. Now, the situation is different, and the political considerations are around the security of this network. And is it reliable, or is it as reliable as the Central European one? Now, a bit of the characterizing features of the Baltic states. This picture shows the production of energy in different countries in the region. As you can tell, what sets the Baltic states apart from the Nordic states is that they're a lot smaller. They have smaller economies, smaller populations, and they are considered as small powers. Norway, for example, has large reserves of hydro. Can't tell you. Hydro, same as Sweden with nuclear as well. Finland has also nuclear and hydro. Renewables and biofuels and waste are also big components in here. Estonia has been energy independent for decades, and that's mainly because of a large production of oil shale that they have. So they produce a lot of oil shale, they even sell electricity forward. Lithuania, for example, out of these three countries, is very interconnected with other states, so it has an interconnection to Sweden, a commercial one, to Poland, to Latvia, and to Russia. It used to be also energy independent, but when they joined the EU, one of the predetermined conditions to join was to get rid of nuclear. So they had an old reactor model, which was very like the one in Chernobyl, that they had to phase down before they could join, or after they joined. So that reduced greatly the independency of that country in terms of electricity production. So, a lot of interconnectedness, but all the connections that they have to Finland, Sweden, and Poland are commercial ones. So they're not part of the loop, the BRELL loop that controls all the technical details. Sorry. Oh, excuse me. Yes, perfect. So, what are the challenges for this, for the development of the synchronization right now? We can see that there's a grand strategy shift in Russia's foreign policy. Like I said, when Poland synchronized from the Russian network to the Central European one, security was not a concern at all. Nowadays, Russia has become much more organized and much more prosperous, much more wealthier than it was in the beginning of 90s. It had a lot more to think about than electricity at that moment. And we can see that the hybrid influencing has become a prominent way of disrupting the situation rather than necessarily a direct confrontation or direct acts of war. So what we mean by hybrid influencing here are indirect means of influencing country, disrupting a country, democratic country, and sort of discrediting that country in different ways. And what I will show you now are some of those examples that have already taken place in this synchronization project or related to that in the energy sector. So, political one. Location is everything. Baltic Sea region is very important for Russia in terms of logistics, in terms of energy transits and shipments. The change in the status quo, referring to the increased power, increased rhetorics that Russia has against the Baltic states, and also the international attention it has gained through the annexation of Crimea or the war in Georgia. So, using hybrid means is a low-risk, possibly a high-reward way of strategy. This map that you see here shows the different connections that the Baltic states have, electricity connections, both to north and to south. So the Nybro-Klaipeda, that's the commercial interconnection that they have with Sweden. There are two commercial lines to Finland, and then a also already existing interconnection to Poland, which will later on be the synchronizing link. Now, this is a showcase, a marine traffic screen capture from a few weeks ago, showing the ships at that very moment crossing across the Baltic Sea region. As you can see, it's very congested. It has a lot of traffic. It's a very important means of transportation that Russia also wants to be actively managing. Now, infrastructure and military. A lot of the things when we talked about and when we discussed, there was before deciding to synchronize with the Central European network, the Baltic states thought about synchronization with the Nordic network. So, in case you're not aware, Sweden, Norway, Finland, north of Denmark, all operate in the same synchronized network. So we all have a same frequency, we all have same reserve capacities, and we operate together. The Baltic states thought about synchronizing through Finland, so they would be part of that network. But after both an economic and a security analysis, they decided to go to Central Europe through Poland. We took part in that. We, as the COE, took part in that analysis through the physical security implications. And one of the things that we noticed was that if you would put such technology that would enable the synchronization to go through the Baltic Sea, the Ostrobothnia, the Gulf of Finland, you would risk putting very, very strategic infrastructure, critical infrastructure, to a non-territorial area. So rather than having it on land, where you have sovereign, independent states, you would put that strategic asset to an area that doesn't have any sovereign powers, that have marine laws or UNCLOS laws, but those operate in a different manner. We also have an example already of Russian interfering in the connection of the Swedish-Lithuanian market interconnector. So back in 2015, when this connection, a Nordbalt cable, was being built, Russian naval ships repeatedly disrupted the cable laying that ABB was doing, required them to move away from the construction area so they could practice their naval exercises there. So we know that Russia is already paying attention to this, and one of the risks would have been to increase the vulnerability of the infrastructure by putting it on the sea. You might wonder, if it goes through Lithuania to Poland, doesn't that create an even larger security threat? That area there is called Suwalki Gap, and it is between Kaliningrad and Belarus. That is a major concern for many, both in the military and civilian sphere, but it is deemed to be a lesser threat than the interconnectors through the sea. Now, Kaliningrad, as I mentioned, that is another key issue in the synchronization process. So one option, like I said, I probably haven't mentioned before, one option for the Baltic states would be not to synchronize with the Central Europe or Northern network, but would be to operate as an independent island, as the three countries. That is very expensive. It would require a lot more infrastructure, and it would be a much more volatile system. If one big power plant would trip, like you remember the constant supply and demand balance, if you have one big power plant that would trip away, you would have to have several smaller ones immediately taking action to balance the system out again. Now, we've deemed that's not plausible for the Baltic states. But Kaliningrad, on the other hand, will have to do that unless they want to be part of the Baltic states in synchronization to Central Europe, or unless Lithuania will accept Belarus to connect Kaliningrad through its territory. Now that would be a major security concern and threat for Lithuania, and most likely will not happen. So what Kaliningrad and what Russia has done instead, they have added a lot of additional generation capacity in Kaliningrad. So this means prior to this, a few years back, they had two big gas power plants. Now the area is very small. If one of them would have tripped out of the system, it would have caused a blackout. Now they have built, with a lot of money, a lot more gas and coal power plants in the region, which will probably, as we will see in a bit, should enable them to operate in an independent yet very costly way. We actually saw Kaliningrad and Russia test this system for the first time this spring. In May, they had a 72-hour test in the region, and it proved out that all those extra resources, those extra gas and coal power plants have proved that the system in this tiny exclave can operate independently. So prior to this event, prior to this testing, Kaliningrad, in the rhetoric of Russia, had always been the victim of synchronization. Why are you doing this? Kaliningrad will suffer. Why are you doing this? This is not worth your time. Now, with the successful testing, Kaliningrad has become from a victim to a very important bargaining piece. Keep that in mind, because I will return to that in the future challenges. Some other means of hybrid influencing that we've identified have been discrediting the project as waste of money, something that, lights, I can testify. I flew from Vilnius yesterday, the lights are on, the electricity network works. So in Russia's opinion, why change that? Everything's fine. There are a lot of indirect influencing campaigns. We already talked about, and I'm sure we will talk more about, the gas sector, for example, and changing geopolitics. I don't know if you're aware or if you remember a few years back, there was a big shale gas revolution. The US had a lot of fracking going on, and a lot of European countries were suddenly interested in whether they have the opportunity to frack gas as well. Could they become more energy independent? Russia obviously saw this as a threat. They don't want European markets to disappear or reduce in size. So they also decided to take action. So one of the ways that they took action, I'm afraid it's a bit small, the text is a bit small, but the former NATO chief, Anders Rasmussen, said that they have, and this is back from 2014, that they have met with allies who can report that Russia, as part of their sophisticated information and disinformation operations, has engaged actively with so-called non-governmental organizations, environmental organizations, working against shale gas to maintain European dependence on imported Russian gas. So one of the tactics that Russia has used and continues to use is to use proxies, other actors who have the same end goal that they do, and fuel their own agenda through these. I'm not saying that fracking is very environmentally friendly, it is not. But the fact that we know that an actor who has a lot of stake, a lot of market value at stake, would fund these organizations in order for European companies or states to let go of fracking is also a bit concerning, especially because it is a direct means of hybrid influencing on these countries. So a lot of countries, 5 countries in Europe, have actually completely let go of the idea. So they've prohibited fracking in their countries completely. So that's indirect influencing campaigns, and that happens not only on energy sphere. We also have encouraging internal conflicts and prejudices. So this is a bit of a longer story, but there is a very controversial nuclear power plant being built in Belarus that has caused Lithuanians, it's built near Vilnius, and it has caused Lithuanians to set a law that prohibits any electricity coming from unsafe nuclear power plants to enter the Lithuanian electricity network. So this has been a major conflict between the two countries lately, and how Russia has sort of fueled the flames in here is that they've essentially, as part of being part of the BRELL network, have demanded the Baltic states to trade in electricity with Belarus as well, with the nuclear power plant. So we've seen that lately, this was in August, when Latvians said that they will actually open electricity trade with Russia, which essentially would also mean Belarusian nuclear power plant electricity would go from Belarus through Russia to Latvia. Of course, Lithuanians were not very happy about this because they trade in electricity with Latvians as well, so it has caused more of a diplomatic dispute in the area. So, future risks. All the things that I mentioned already have happened already. Some of the things that might happen before the 2025 deadline, which would be when the Baltic states should synchronize with the Central European network. There is a possibility. This picture is from Litgrid, which is the transmission system operator in Lithuania. They say that they have seen increased grid reinforcements in the borders near the Baltic states, and they believe that this might be this might show that the Belarus and Russia are ready to synchronize themselves and close the loop around the Baltic states before the Baltic states actually can do that themselves in 2025. And when I said that, remember what is happening in Kaliningrad, because that is a major bargaining chip right now. Before the successful testing, it wasn't sure what would happen to Kaliningrad. Now, if we know that that can operate independently, it means that the rest of Belarus and Russia don't have any time to wait, or they don't have any need to wait for the Baltic states to synchronize. They can do it before the Baltic states themselves. That would put a huge pressure for the three countries to either operate independently, which would be very expensive, and we're not even sure if it would be possible, or find other means of operating. Another one is the energy sector transformation in Europe. So when I said that oil shale in Estonia has been one of the biggest energy independent factors in the country, oil shale is more polluting than coal. More polluting than coal. It is greatly hindered by the European emission trading system, and it means that in the future years, Estonia, as well as all the countries in European Union, really have to come up with new ways of creating electricity, new investments into infrastructure, into renewable technologies. But this will also mean that for the Baltic states and for Estonia in particular, they will soon face they might soon face a situation similar to what Lithuania faced with its nuclear power plant face-off, when it became from an energy independent state to a very energy dependent state. So these are the future risks that are worthwhile to look at. And here's, for clarification, again the photo of Estonia's role, oil shale's role in Estonia. So before I end my presentation, the key takeaways I'd like you to have from this presentation today are the fact that the Baltic states' energy security has improved. It's better now than it has been in decades, and that's because of a lot of determined action taken in those states, a lot of new market opportunities, increased transparency, infrastructural changes. Then the EU has been a fundamental part of all of this. EU, along with NATO, have provided stability, have provided funding, have provided lessons learned, recommendations, directives, and market mechanisms. So all of this is essential. The region, however, is still fertile ground for hybrid influencing, and Russia has already been campaigning and will continue campaigning. So energy security, even though it's been improved, like I said, it's never static. You can never say that this is enough, we are secure now, and nothing will happen anymore. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Julia, for this very interesting and I think comprehensive presentation on the challenges and also the opportunities now that are embedded when the Baltic states are transforming their electricity framework or structure or whatever you can say. What is, of course, do you see opportunity, if you look at the security, I mean, from a preventive kind of point of view, that what we want to have is just a normal functioning market system. If you look at it today and if it goes as planned in 2025, will there be big differences, or is this all risks that are not alive now, and or how do you view that?
Right. It's a very good question, and it's almost impossible to answer, to be honest, because the situation is changing constantly. What would be ideal is that everyday people would never have to know about this or would never experience any of that. But it is also very important to stay vigilant and be aware of these situations, that there is something going on when you flick the lights on and off. It takes a lot of planning, and there are some threats and vulnerabilities in the whole system. So I would say 2025, I am very confident. I'm an optimist. I'm very confident that everything will go as planned, and that there will be we will reach a conclusion that is optimal for everyone. But in the event that we don't, we need to know that there can be consequences that can also be felt all the way to Sweden, or all the way to the Nordic states.
Do you think that it could start in Sweden and then go back to the Baltics? Do you think of those scenarios, or is it just focused on the Baltics?
Right. So a lot of the changes that we will see in the future, not just the synchronization, but also in terms of energy sector developments, we will face the rising costs for fossil fuels, or the political decisions to focus on one energy sector than another. So they will all have threats inlaid in those political decisions. So something could happen in Sweden that has an effect on the Baltic states or the Baltic Sea region in general, but it's very hard to say.
You talked a bit about cyber threats, so using proxies in protecting the electricity flows in the cyber realm. But there is also this cable in between Sweden and Lithuania, which is that's a concrete, practical cable.
Yes.
I think you mentioned that is not protected.
Right. So it is protected to a degree, but that degree is quite low. So I will, in a nutshell, so my Danish colleague once in a workshop described these sorts of cables. So it's a commercial cable, direct current. You can consider them as power plants. And that power plant is 700 megawatts, the cable between Sweden and Lithuania. 700 megawatts in Sweden is not a lot because the electricity system is a lot bigger. But 700 megawatts in Lithuania, which has a lot smaller electricity network, it means much, much more. So if there were to happen something for that cable, and it would disrupt, and usually the cable flows from Sweden to Lithuania. So if something were to happen to that cable, and for whatever reason, the reserve power in that region would not react to it immediately, there could be trouble. It could mean even in a worst case situation, a regional blackout. But how the cable is laid in the bottom of the sea, that's one of the concerns, is that you can't protect it with metal covers or anything because the sea moves it around. So if you have, say, a metal plates around it, it could harm the cable. As the sea moves around, the sand moves around, the cable has to move a bit as well. So it happens sometimes. Information cables or electricity cables or even gas pipelines get hit. If it's a shallow water, if there's a large vessel, an anchor could hit the cable. There could be another disruption from an underwater malicious activity, for example. And it's very hard to identify who the perpetrator is or where it happened in a cable. Gas pipelines might have automatic sensors that say where the pressure is starting to reduce, so you'll know where you have to go down to fix it. But with electricity, you might not have that, or it's very expensive to incorporate that sort of technology to the whole cable network. So in that sense, the seabed and the sea cables have a whole different security dimension than your regular overhead land cables have.
It's super fascinating, I think. Questions to Julia? Come on.
Oh, there was one, yeah.
There is one, yes. Inga-Lena is on her way.
Yeah, my name...
We can hear you.
Yep.
My name is Bengt Larsén, and I have 2 questions. The first question is, what did NATO say about Nord Stream 2? And when it is now being built, does NATO do anything to prevent any security problems that might arise?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. NATO, as in, I am not in the position to talk for NATO. So I cannot speak in behalf of NATO, tell its alliance states what to do and what not to do. So obviously, I know that in the headquarters, and I know in our organization as well, we keep a close eye on what happens, and if needed, we will consult with the alliance nations, partnership nations as well. But in essence, there is a very limited scope to what NATO can do and what it can't do. So energy infrastructure is a national business in the end. So if companies want to invest in energy infrastructure, if nations want to build something, it is not up to, as far as I've understood, not up to NATO if they want to do that. But we will provide them with a consultancy as a NATO accredited Centre of Excellence, as well as the NATO headquarters.
Thank you. Any more questions? That's strong light, so you get this kind of view looking here. They are here up front here. Inga-Lena. Please.
Mitt namn är Lennart. Jag undrar, sorry, you take me. You were into this about the proxies, working through proxies. It must be a great interest for Putin to have control over the energy production in Europe. And those against the methods of like stop it and make it from gas instead. And one country that has been very much against, stopped in all the nuclear reactors is in Germany. And there is a very strong environmentalist spirits and also Green Party. What do you think about the influence from Putin on this Green Party or on the environmentalist organizations?
That's a very hard and interesting question, but very hard for me to answer. I know that some of my colleagues are focusing more on the geopolitics of Russia in that sense. I mean, based on the example that I've given today, I do understand Russia's perspective in trying to hold on to its main market, gas market, however it can. So Europe, for Russia, we always talk about European dependency on Russian gas, but we oftentimes forget that Russia is very dependent on Europe to buy that gas. Those gas fields that are in the near Ural don't have any other customer, and Russia's GDP is mainly coming from gas and oil, crude oil and gas exports. So Russia wants to keep European markets. It's willing to do a lot to do that. It's willing to cut prices, willing to play ball. It has the antitrust investigation that European Commission launched against Gazprom required Gazprom a number of measures to open the market and reduce the long-term contracts of gas and so on. They've agreed to all of those. They want to build new capacity so they can get new gas here. So in that sense, I wouldn't be surprised with the rhetoric and with the use of hybrid influencing if Russia wouldn't try to lobby its way into different governments as well. As for how and which governments and which parties, I don't know. We would have to have more investigations on these. Maybe my colleagues have more intel on that, but I wouldn't be surprised that they wouldn't, that they would try to hold onto their market however they can.
Thank you so much, Julia. Please join me in thanking you for joining us today, for an excellent presentation. And we have a small token of our appreciation. Not so small, perhaps.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.